You are completely insane, Maeve Sinclair. Aunt Gertrude's shrill voice echoed through the small kitchen of the shoebox apartment. Maeve didn't even bother to look up from the coffee-stained newspaper she held in her trembling hands. There it was, in bold letters, the advertisement that had just completely changed her life. Librarian wanted, Ravenswood Mansion. Salary, 5 times above average. Lodging included. Experience with antique books mandatory. Absolute discretion. The insane thing would be to keep living in this cockroach-infested apartment with you, Auntie, Maeve replied, folding the newspaper with deliberate calm. Insane would be continuing to work at that moldy bookstore earning peanuts. Insane would be... That mansion is cursed! Gertrude slammed her wooden spoon on the table, making the teacup dance dangerously close to the edge. Her bulging eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. 5 people have already worked there in the last 2 years. 5. And they all ran out in the middle of the night, Maeve. Running. One of them, poor Mildred, went white-haired overnight. Mildred was always platinum blonde, Aunt. Dramatic is the word. And what about the white ravens? Those horrible birds that perch on the mansion's roofs? Maeve finally raised her gaze, revealing honey-colored eyes that sparkled with determination and a touch of rebelliousness. At 28, she was fed up. Fed up with unpaid bills, fed up with postponed dreams, fed up with being the sensible niece who never did anything exciting. And that advertisement, that impossible, absurd, tempting advertisement. Albino ravens are rare, not evil, she said, standing up and smoothing the vintage skirt she'd bought at a thrift shop. And I need this job, Aunt. I need it badly. 3 days later, Maeve stood before the wrought iron gates of Ravenswood Mansion, her only suitcase at her feet, and her heart beating like an off-rhythm drum. My God. The mansion was even more imposing than the town gossip suggested. 3 stories of dark stone rose against the cloudy sky like a Gothic sentinel. Pointed towers pierced the low clouds. Enormous windows, most with heavy curtains drawn, watched the street like drowsy eyes. And there, sprinkled across the sloping roofs like sinister snowflakes, they were. The white ravens. Dozens of them. You must be Miss Sinclair. Maeve nearly jumped out of her skin. She turned sharply and found herself face to face with a woman who seemed to have stepped directly out of a Victorian novel. Tall, thin as a winter tree branch, graying hair pulled into a bun so tight it must be causing headaches. She wore an impeccable black suit and held a clipboard like it was a weapon. Yes, that's me. Maeve Sinclair. She extended her hand, trying to appear more confident than she felt. The woman looked at the extended hand as if it were a strange creature, but eventually shook it, with fingers that felt like cold twigs. Mrs. Blackwood, housekeeper. Follow me. Mr. Lockhart is waiting for you in the library. Mr. Lockhart? Maeve hurried to grab her suitcase and follow the woman through the gates that opened with a creak worthy of a horror movie. I thought the mansion belonged to the Ravenswood family. It did. The answer was dry, not inviting further questions. The path to the front door seemed endless. Once magnificent gardens now grew wild, disheveled rose bushes intertwined with ivy climbing the stone walls. A central fountain was dry, covered in moss, with an angel statue whose face had been worn by time until it became merely a ghostly blur. And those ravens. Those damned white ravens watched her from above, completely silent. Maeve felt a shiver run down her spine. The front door opened before Mrs. Blackwood could touch it. Inside, everything was shadow and decadent opulence. A dusty crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling. Dark wood-paneled walls, faded Persian rugs, the smell of old books, candle wax, and something else Maeve couldn't identify. Perhaps loneliness? This way. They crossed a corridor that seemed endless, past closed doors, climbed a wide staircase where old portraits watched them with silent disapproval. Maeve tried not to think about all the warnings she'd received. Don't go, Maeve. There's something wrong with that house. The owner is a bizarre recluse no one has ever seen. Finally, Mrs. Blackwood stopped before double oak doors carved with intricate patterns of ravens and roses. "The library," she announced, knocking 3 times. "Mr. Lockhart, the candidate has arrived." Silence. Then, a voice. Deep, velvety, with a touch of something Maeve couldn't name. Irritation, weariness, pain. "Come in." Mrs. Blackwood opened the doors and gestured for Maeve to enter, but she didn't accompany her. The doors closed behind her with a definitive click, and Maeve found herself completely alone in the most extraordinary library she'd ever seen in her life. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on every wall. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of books. A wooden rolling ladder to reach the highest volumes. Tables covered with open tomes. Antique globes. Astronomical maps. Light filtered through the tall windows, creating rays of golden dust dancing in the air. And there, with his back to her, before the tallest window, stood a male figure. Tall. Broad shoulders beneath a white linen shirt. Dark hair slightly too long, touching his collar. Hands tucked in the pockets of dark trousers. He didn't turn around. "Miss Sinclair," that voice again, sending an involuntary shiver down Maeve's spine. "Tell me, why would an apparently sensible woman accept to work in a mansion the entire town considers cursed?" Maeve swallowed hard. She decided on honesty. "Because I'm desperate. Because the salary is absurdly generous, and because—" She hesitated, then continued more firmly. "Because I don't believe in curses. I believe in books, in knowledge, in stories. And this library is a dream." He remained motionless for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to turn. "How interesting," he murmured. "Someone who doesn't run away." And when Maeve finally saw the face of Dashiell Lockhart, owner of the infamous Ravenswood mansion, her heart simply forgot how to beat. He was devastatingly handsome, but not in a conventional way. There was something intense, almost wild in those eyes of a blue so dark they seemed black. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, a small scar crossing his left eyebrow, and an expression of sadness? No, something deeper, haunting. "I see you expected a monster," he said, and there was a dark touch of humor in his voice. No, I didn't expect anything," Maeve stammered, feeling her face heat up. Damn. She had come here to be professional, not to gawk like a teenager. Liar. But he almost smiled. Almost. Everyone expects something. The town has turned this house, and me, into urban legends. "So, Miss Sinclair, since you're here and haven't run away yet, let's discuss the rules." He approached, and Maeve forced herself to stand firm, though every instinct screamed at her to notice how he moved with feline grace, how the air seemed to change when he drew near. "Rule number 1, said Dashiell, stopping just a meter away from her, close enough for her to smell something masculine and slightly woody. "You don't ask questions about me, about my family, or about why this mansion is in the state it's in." "Agreed." "Rule number 2, you don't receive visitors. No one but you and the staff enters this property." "That won't be a problem." "Rule number 3. He hesitated, and for the first time seemed uncertain. "You don't come to the library after midnight." Maeve frowned. "Why?" "Because," he said, his voice dropping until it became almost a whisper, "I'll be here. And I prefer solitude." They stared at each other. Maeve felt something electric in the air between them, something that made her want to simultaneously flee and stay planted in that exact spot forever. "All right," she finally agreed, "but I have one condition." He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Condition?" "I want full access to the books, all of them. No restrictions. If I'm going to catalog and organize this library, I need to know it completely." For a second, Maeve thought he would refuse. His dark eyes narrowed, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could read every secret written on her soul. Then, unexpectedly, he extended his hand. We have a deal, Miss Sinclair. Welcome to Ravenswood Mansion. Try not to let the ghosts frighten you." When Maeve shook his hand, his palm warm and rough against hers, she felt that moment crystallize in her memory. She didn't know it yet, but her life had just split into two distinct parts, before Dashiell Lockhart and after him. Outside, the white ravens began to caw, and somewhere in the depths of the mansion, an antique clock began to strike the hours with heavy, solemn chimes, as if marking not just time, but the beginning of something inevitable, something that would change them both forever. Maeve's room was nothing like she'd expected. Instead of some dusty servants' quarters tucked away in the attic, Mrs. Blackwood had led her to a spacious bedroom on the second floor with tall windows overlooking the wild gardens. The four-poster bed was draped in deep emerald velvet. An antique writing desk sat by the window. A wardrobe that could house an entire family stood against one wall. Everything was immaculate, as if someone had been preparing for her arrival with meticulous care. "Dinner is at 7 sharp," Mrs. Blackwood announced from the doorway, her bony fingers gripping the doorframe. "Mr. Lockhart dines alone in his study. You'll eat in the small dining room. Don't be late." "Wait!" But the door had already clicked shut. Maeve sank onto the bed, her mind racing. Dines alone? So much for getting to know her mysterious employer. She glanced at the ornate clock on the mantel. 6:47 p.m. 13 minutes to make herself presentable. She changed quickly into her nicest dress, a deep burgundy number that had seen better days but still had dignity, and tried to tame her auburn curls into something resembling order. Failed spectacularly. Gave up. The small dining room turned out to be larger than her entire apartment back in town. A table that could seat 12 gleamed under candlelight. But only one place was set at the far end, looking ridiculously lonely. Dinner arrived via a silent maid who looked no older than 18 and seemed terrified to make eye contact. Roasted chicken, herb potatoes, glazed carrots. It was delicious. It was also the loneliest meal Maeve had ever eaten. Afterwards, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, she found herself drawn back to the library. The mansion at night was a different creature entirely. Shadows pooled in corners. Floorboards creaked with each step. Portraits seemed to watch her with increased interest, and those damned white ravens. She could hear them moving on the roof above, their talons scratching against tiles. The library doors were slightly ajar, lamplight spilling into the corridor. Her heart hammered. It wasn't midnight yet, barely past 9. Surely she could. Maeve pushed the door open. "I thought we had an agreement about midnight, Miss Sinclair." She jumped, hand flying to her chest. Dashiell sat in a leather armchair near the fireplace, a book in his lap, a glass of amber liquid on the side table. He'd changed into more casual clothes, dark trousers, and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that Maeve definitely should not be noticing. "It's only 9, she managed, stepping inside. "You said midnight." "So I did." He marked his page and set the book aside. "Can't sleep?" "Too quiet. Back home, there's always noise, traffic, neighbors fighting. Mrs. Chen's television blaring game shows through paper-thin walls. She moved closer, drawn to the warmth of the fire. "This silence is deafening." Something flickered across his face. "Understanding?" "I know what you mean. I've lived with silence for 3 years now. You'd think I'd be used to it." He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Sit, unless you'd rather flee to your room and pretend you don't find this situation utterly bizarre." Maeve sat, pulse racing. "Why did you shut yourself away here? The town says—" "I don't care what the town says." His voice turned sharp, defensive. Then he sighed, rubbing his face. "Forgive me. That was rude. Let's just say, I had my reasons, personal ones." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Maeve studied him in the flickering light. He looked tired. Not just physically, but soul-deep tired. Like someone carrying a weight too heavy to share. "What are you reading?" she asked softly. He glanced at the book. Poetry. Byron. She walks in beauty, like the night. A ghost of a smile. Dramatic, I know. Suits the setting. I love Byron. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Though I've always been more partial to Shelley. My soul is an enchanted boat. Dashiell's eyes lit up, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. You know Shelley. I'm a librarian. Of course I know Shelley. She grinned. Mary Shelley is better, though. Frankenstein changed my life when I was 12. A woman of taste. He actually smiled. Properly smiled. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger, less haunted. Most people these days only read whatever's trending on social media. Most people are missing out. Maeve leaned forward, warming to the topic. Books are time machines, doorways, magic spells. They're the only thing that makes life bearable. He finished quietly. Their eyes met, held. Maeve's breath caught. There was something in his gaze, vulnerability, loneliness, and something else that made her skin tingle and her heart race. Mr. Lockhart. Dashiell. His voice was rough. If we're going to spend evenings debating literature, you might as well use my name. Dashiell. She tested the name, liked how it felt on her tongue. Why do you need a librarian? You clearly know these books intimately. Because this library is dying. He stood abruptly, moving to the window. These books need proper care, cataloging, preservation. My grandfather collected them obsessively, but after he died, after everything fell apart, he trailed off, jaw tightening. They deserve better than my neglect. Maeve rose and moved to stand beside him. Outside, the white ravens were settling on the eaves, their pale forms ghostly against the dark sky. Why white ravens? She asked. My grandmother loved them. Said they were good luck, symbols of wisdom and transformation. His reflection in the glass looked unbearably sad. After she died, they came. Dozens of them. They've never left. That's actually beautiful. He turned to her surprised. Most people think it's creepy. Most people lack imagination. Maeve smiled up at him. I think your grandmother would be pleased. They stood close, too close. Maeve could feel the heat radiating from him, could count the different shades of blue in his eyes. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Dashiell reached out slowly, as if moving through water, and tucked a wayward curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. You're not what I expected, he murmured. Neither are you, she whispered back. The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime. 10 o'clock. The sound broke the spell. Dashiell stepped back, and Maeve felt the loss of his nearness like a physical ache. You should rest, he said, his voice carefully neutral again. Tomorrow you begin properly. The library is extensive. Good night, Dashiell. Good night, Maeve. As she walked back to her room, Maeve's mind whirled. What was she doing? She'd been here less than a day, and was already falling under the spell of this broken, beautiful man and his haunted mansion. This was supposed to be a job, just a job. But when she climbed into that emerald bed and closed her eyes, all she could see was Dashiell's face in the firelight, his fingers gentle against her skin, and the loneliness in his eyes that mirrored something deep within herself. Outside, the white ravens called to each other in the darkness, and in the Forbidden East Tower, the one Mrs. Blackwood had specifically told her to avoid, a single light flickered on, then off again. Someone, or something, was watching. Maeve woke to something tapping at her window. Tap, tap, tap. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and found herself staring at a white raven perched on the windowsill. It tilted its head, studying her with unsettling intelligence, then tapped the glass once more with its pale beak. You've got to be kidding me, Maeve muttered, throwing back the covers. The moment she approached the window, the raven spread its wings and took flight, but not before dropping something on the sill. A key. Old, ornate, made of tarnished silver. Maeve opened the window and picked it up, turning it over in her palm. There was an engraving on the bow. ER, ad astra. To the stars. What the hell? Talking to yourself already, Miss Sinclair? That's usually a 6-month development. She spun around to find Dashiell leaning against her doorframe, coffee cup in hand, looking infuriatingly amused. He'd clearly been up for hours, hair damp from a shower, dressed in charcoal trousers and a navy shirt that made his eyes look impossibly blue. "Your door was open," he explained at her scandalized expression. "And I heard you swearing. Everything all right?" Maeve clutched the key, suddenly aware she was standing in her nightgown. A modest cotton thing, but still. "A raven just delivered this. One of your white ravens." His amusement vanished. He set down his coffee and crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the key from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, and that familiar electricity sparked between them. "ER," he read quietly. "Elizabeth Ravenswood. My grandmother." He looked up at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Where did the raven drop this?" "Right there. On the windowsill." Dashiell moved to the window, examining the sill, then gazed out at the gardens where dozens of white ravens were now gathering around the dry fountain. They've never done anything like this before. In 3 years they've just watched. Nothing more. "Maybe they approve of me?" Maeve tried for levity, but Dashiell's troubled expression made her stomach clench. "What does the key open?" "I don't know." He pocketed it. "But I intend to find out. Come on."
You wanted full access to the library. Let's begin your real work. 20 minutes later, properly dressed and caffeinated, Maeve stood in the library feeling simultaneously excited and overwhelmed. Dashiell had pulled out ledgers, old catalogs, and what appeared to be his grandmother's personal notes. "The collection is roughly 15,000 volumes, he explained, spreading papers across a large table. "But the organization system died with my grandfather."
Books are everywhere. By subject, by author, by publication date, sometimes seemingly at random. Your job is to bring order to chaos. "My specialty," Maeve grinned, rolling up her sleeves. "Where do we start?" "We?" He raised an eyebrow. "You don't honestly think I can do this alone? This is months of work, maybe years. Besides, you know these books. I need your knowledge." Dashiell looked like he wanted to argue, but then something shifted in his face, a softening, a quiet surrender. "All right. We'll start with the North Wing. Fair warning, it's neglected." Neglected was an understatement. The North Wing was a maze of smaller rooms packed floor to ceiling with books in various states of disarray. Stacks teetered precariously. Volumes lay open on chairs as if someone had been reading and simply walked away mid-sentence. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight. "This is magnificent," Maeve breathed. Dashiell laughed, a real, genuine laugh that transformed his entire being. "Only you would see magnificence in this disaster." They worked side by side for hours. Maeve would pull books, call out titles, and Dashiell would note them in a new catalog system she'd devised. They fell into an easy rhythm, occasionally debating the proper classification of certain volumes. "Poetry should be separate from plays," Maeve insisted, clutching a water-damaged copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. "Shakespeare wrote plays in verse. It's all poetry." "That's a cop-out categorization and you know it. It's efficient. It's lazy." They were standing close, both holding the same book, arguing with smiles on their faces. The air between them felt charged, alive. "You're infuriating," Dashiell said softly, but his eyes were warm. "You're stubborn," Maeve countered, not backing down. "Compromise? Poetry subsection under drama? Deal." Neither of them let go of the book. "Maeve," Dashiell began, his voice dropping to something intimate, something that made her skin tingle. "I should tell you. Mr. Lockhart." They jumped apart as Mrs. Blackwood's voice echoed through the mansion. The housekeeper appeared in the doorway moments later, looking more flustered than Maeve had thought possible. "Sir, there are people at the gate, from town. They're demanding to see Miss Sinclair. Maeve's stomach dropped. What? Who? A woman claiming to be your aunt. And half a dozen others. They have signs. Signs? Dashiell's voice turned dangerous. What kind of signs? Mrs. Blackwood grimaced. The kind that say, "Save Maeve Sinclair, and no one belongs in the cursed mansion." Oh my God. Maeve buried her face in her hands. Aunt Gertrude. She actually organized a rescue party. I'm going to kill her. But when she looked up, Dashiell had gone rigid. His jaw was clenched, and that haunted look was back in his eyes, the one that made him seem miles away even when standing right beside her. You should go, he said quietly. Tell them you're fine. Send them away. Dashiell, I'll handle the library alone. This was a mistake anyway. He turned away, shoulders tense. I work better in solitude. The dismissal stung. Maeve stood there, watching him retreat into himself, building walls she'd thought they'd started to dismantle. The easy warmth of moments ago had vanished, replaced by cold distance. This isn't about them, is it? She said softly. It's about what they think, what they say. He didn't answer, didn't turn around. I'm not leaving, Maeve declared, surprising herself with her vehemence. I accepted this job. I'm staying. They can wave signs until they're blue in the face. I don't care. You will care. His voice was hollow. Eventually, everyone does. The whispers get louder. The isolation becomes unbearable. That's why the others left, Maeve. Not because of ghosts or curses. Because the town made it impossible. She walked to him, placed a hand on his arm, felt him tense beneath her touch. I'm not them, she said firmly. I'm not everyone else. And you're not whatever monster they've made you out to be. You're just lonely. And maybe I am too. Dashiell finally looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes nearly broke her heart. Vulnerability, hope, fear. Maeve Sinclair, he murmured, you're going to destroy me. Or save you, she whispered back. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Then Mrs. Blackwood cleared her throat. Sir, the gate? Dashiell straightened, his mask sliding back into place. Tell them Miss Sinclair is perfectly safe and we'll see them briefly at the gate. Alone. She's an adult capable of making her own decisions. And add, Maeve said with sudden mischief, that the only curse here is the terrible coffee Mrs. Blackwood makes. The housekeeper's lips twitched. It's not that bad. It's worse. Even Dashiell smiled again. As Maeve headed to confront her ridiculous rescue party, she glanced back once. Dashiell stood among the books and dust and broken things, watching her go, and in that moment, Maeve knew with absolute certainty she was already falling in love with him. The key in his pocket seemed to burn with possibility. Whatever it opened, whatever secrets this mansion held, they would discover them together. Aunt Gertrude looked like she was leading a medieval crusade. She stood at the wrought iron gates with 11 other townspeople, brandishing a sign that read, Maeve deserves better, in aggressive red letters. Behind her, Mr. Patterson from the grocery store held, Ravenswood a danger, while Mrs. Chen, bless her dramatic soul, had somehow procured a megaphone. Maeve Sinclair, we know you're in there, Mrs. Chen's voice boomed across the grounds. Maeve took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and marched down the winding path. The white ravens watched from their perches, heads tilting in unison like spectators at a tennis match. Aunt Gertrude, Maeve called out, stopping on her side of the gate. What? And I cannot stress this enough? The hell? Maeve! Gertrude clutched the bars like a prisoner. Thank God we've come to rescue you from this gorgeous mansion with excellent pay and a library that makes me weep with joy? Maeve crossed her arms. Yes. Terribly oppressive. Mr. Patterson stepped forward, looking genuinely concerned. Miss Sinclair, we're worried. 5 people before you. Left because you people made their lives miserable. Maeve interrupted. Mrs. Blackwood told me everything. The constant harassment, the rumors, the concerned citizens showing up at all hours. You didn't drive them away from the mansion, you drove them away from the town. Guilty silence fell over the group. That's different, Gertrude sputtered. Those people were… well, they weren't my niece. Exactly, Mrs. Chen lowered her megaphone. We're trying to protect you, dear. That man is dangerous. No one has seen him in 3 years. He never comes to town, never speaks to anyone. That's not normal. You know what's not normal? Maeve's voice rose. Organizing a protest because someone wants privacy. Maybe he stays away because every time he tries to exist, the town treats him like a carnival sideshow. But the curse, someone in the back started. There is no curse, Maeve practically shouted. There are just white ravens, which are beautiful, by the way, and a lonely man living in his family home and people with too much time and too little compassion. She was breathing hard, fists clenched, and somewhere behind her she sensed movement. Dashiell had followed her out but stayed back, hidden in the shadows of the overgrown hedges. She could feel him listening. Gertrude's face softened. Sweetheart, I'm just scared for you. You're all I have left. The anger drained from Maeve's body. She stepped closer to the gate, voice gentling. I know, Auntie, but I'm not a child. I'm 28 years old, drowning in debt, with no prospects. This job is a gift. Mr. Lockhart is kind. The house is amazing. And for the first time in years, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. But you barely know him. Then let me get to know him. Maeve gripped the cold iron bars. Without the entire town breathing down my neck. Please. I'm asking you, all of you, to just let me be happy. Can you do that? The group exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Mr. Patterson lowered his sign. The girl has a point, he muttered. We might have been a bit, enthusiastic with the previous librarians. A bit? Maeve raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Chen, you literally followed the last one to the grocery store with pamphlets about cult deprogramming. Mrs. Chen had the decency to look embarrassed. I was concerned. Be concerned from a distance, Maeve said firmly, but not unkindly. I'll call you, Aunt Gertrude, once a week, to prove I'm alive and not being held in a dungeon. Deal? Gertrude deflated like a sad balloon. Once a week isn't enough. Twice, Maeve amended. But that's my final offer. Fine, Gertrude sniffled. But if anything feels wrong, anything at all, I'll leave immediately, I promise. After extracting several more promises and enduring a teary goodbye, Maeve watched the group trudge back toward their cars. Only when the last one disappeared around the bend did she allow herself to relax. That was quite a performance. She turned to find Dashiell emerging from the shadows, expression unreadable. I meant every word, she said quietly. I know. He moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. You defended me. Why? Because they're wrong about you. Maeve held his gaze. And because someone needed to say it. Something cracked in his carefully constructed armor. His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently cupped her cheek. The touch was feather-light, reverent, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. Maeve Sinclair, he breathed, you're the bravest person I've ever met. Or the stupidest, she tried to joke, but her voice came out shaky. His thumb was tracing slow circles on her skin, and her brain was short-circuiting. No. Brave. He stepped closer, and suddenly there was no space between them. Do you know what happened 3 years ago? Why I became the town hermit? You don't have to. I want to. His other hand found her waist, steadying them both. I was engaged. Caroline Winters. Beautiful, sophisticated, from a prominent family. Everyone said we were perfect together. Maeve's heart clenched with something that felt suspiciously like jealousy. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found her in the gardens with my business partner. They'd been having an affair for months. His voice was flat, but pain flickered in his eyes. She said I was boring, too focused on books and dead relatives. Said the only reason she'd agreed to marry me was for the Ravenswood fortune. Dashiell, I'm so sorry. After that, the rumors started. That I was unstable, dangerous, that I'd threatened her. None of it was true, but Caroline's family is influential. They poisoned the town against me. He laughed bitterly. So I stopped trying. Locked myself away with my books and my ravens. Safer that way. Until I showed up, Maeve whispered. Until you showed up, he agreed. And now his forehead was resting against hers, their breaths mingling. Stubborn, brilliant, fearless you, making me remember what it's like to want something beyond these walls. What do you want? The question escaped before she could stop it. His eyes met hers, dark and intense, and filled with something that made her knees weak. You, he said simply. I want you, Maeve, and it terrifies me. Her heart was thundering so loud she was certain he could hear it. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. Promise. The kiss happened naturally, inevitably, like gravity. His lips met hers soft and questioning, and Maeve answered by threading her fingers through his hair and pulling him closer. He groaned against her mouth, arms tightening around her waist, lifting her slightly as the kiss deepened into something desperate and perfect, and absolutely world-shattering. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dashiell rested his forehead against hers again. I have something to show you, he murmured. Something the key might open. But Maeve, it could change everything. She pulled back enough to see his face. Then let's go change everything. He smiled, full and genuine and breathtaking. Hand in hand they walked back toward the mansion, white ravens taking flight around them like a blessing. Whatever secrets awaited, they would face them together. Dashiell led her through corridors Maeve hadn't yet explored, their fingers still intertwined. Every few steps, he'd glance back at her as if confirming she was real, and each time Maeve's heart would do a ridiculous flip. Where are we going? She asked as they climbed a narrow spiral staircase. The East Tower, the one Mrs. Blackwood told you to avoid. Ah, the Forbidden Zone. Should I be worried? Probably. But he squeezed her hand. Though if anyone can handle it, it's the woman who just faced down an angry mob armed with a megaphone. Mrs. Chen's megaphone game is strong. Respect where it's due. He laughed, and the sound echoed beautifully in the stone stairwell. They emerged into a circular room at the tower's peak, and Maeve gasped. It was a sanctuary. Unlike the rest of the mansion's Gothic grandeur, this room was light and airy. Windows on all sides flooded the space with afternoon sun. Easels held half-finished paintings, landscapes, portraits, abstract swirls of color. Art supplies were scattered everywhere in organized chaos. And covering an entire wall were photographs, a beautiful woman with dark hair and kind eyes, often surrounded by white ravens. Your grandmother, Maeve breathed, moving closer to the photographs. Elizabeth. Dashiell's voice softened. This was her studio. After she died, I locked it. Haven't been up here in 3 years. He pulled the key from his pocket. But this key doesn't fit the door. I checked years ago. Maeve studied the room, her librarian's mind cataloging details. The easels, the photos, the small writing desk in the corner covered in... were those journals. There, she pointed. The desk had a drawer with an ornate silver keyhole. Dashiell crossed to it, key trembling slightly in his hand. What if, whatever it is, we'll face it together? Maeve stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. He inserted the key. It fit perfectly. Inside the drawer were letters, dozens of them, tied with faded blue ribbon. Dashiell lifted them with reverent hands, and something else caught Maeve's eye. A leather journal, embossed with ER on the cover. May I? She asked, gesturing to the journal. He nodded, lost in examining the first letter. Maeve opened the journal carefully. Elizabeth Ravenswood's handwriting was elegant, flowing across the pages like poetry. She flipped to a random entry dated 20 years ago. The ravens came again today. 17 of them now, all pure white. Marcus thinks I'm mad for feeding them, but they bring me such peace. They're messengers, I think, between worlds, between what was and what could be. I've been painting them obsessively. Maybe through art I can capture what I cannot explain. This feeling that they're trying to tell me something important. Maeve, Dashiell's voice was strained. You need to read this. He handed her a letter, dated 6 months before his grandmother's death. The handwriting was shakier, but still recognizable. My dearest Dashiell, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you finally found the courage to return to my tower. Good. It's time you knew the truth about our family, about this house, and about the ravens. The Ravenswoods have always been cursed, not by magic or malevolence, but by loneliness. We build walls, we push people away. We choose isolation over vulnerability because we've been hurt, and we convince ourselves that solitude is safer than love. I was like that once. Then I met your grandfather, and he taught me that the bravest thing we can do is let someone in. The ravens came the day I decided to stop being afraid. They stayed because they recognize kindred spirits, lost souls finding their way home. The mansion isn't cursed, darling boy. It's waiting for someone brave enough to choose love over fear. When that happens, the ravens will know. They always know. Don't make my mistake of waiting too long. Don't let Caroline's betrayal turn you into a ghost in your own home. The right person will come. Let her in. Let her see you, all of you, even the broken parts. Especially the broken parts. All my love, Gran. Maeve's eyes were blurring with tears. She looked up to find Dashiell staring out the window, shoulders rigid with tension. She knew, he said hoarsely. She knew I'd end up exactly like this, alone, afraid. But you're not alone anymore. Maeve moved to stand beside him. Outside, the white ravens were gathering in unprecedented numbers, covering the gardens like snow. Dashiell, look. He turned, and his breath caught. There must have been 100 ravens now, all watching the tower with their unnerving intelligence. I've never seen this many, he whispered. Not even when she died. Maeve took his hand. Your grandmother said they recognize kindred spirits, lost souls finding their way home. She squeezed his fingers. Maybe they're celebrating. Celebrating what? Us. You letting me in. Choosing to be brave. He turned to her fully, and the raw emotion in his face made her chest ache. I haven't been brave. I've been terrified every moment since you arrived. Terrified of wanting you. Terrified of what happens when you realize I'm just... Stop. Maeve reached up, cupping his face with both hands. You're not just anything. You're brilliant and kind and wounded and wonderful. And I... She hesitated, then pushed forward with characteristic boldness. I'm falling in love with you, Dashiell Lockhart. Fast and hard and completely illogically. It's been 5 days. This is insane. But I can't help it. The words hung between them, massive and terrifying and true. Dashiell stared at her, eyes wide with disbelief and hope. You... What? I love you, she repeated, heart hammering. Or I'm about to, or I already do. The tense is unclear, but the feeling isn't. He made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, then kissed her with such intensity that Maeve's knees actually buckled. His arms wrapped around her waist, holding her up, holding her close, and she could feel him trembling. I love you too, he gasped against her lips. God, Maeve, I love you so much it scares me senseless. Then let's be scared together. They stood there in Elizabeth's tower, surrounded by art and light and the ghosts of better days, kissing like they could pour all their broken pieces together and make something whole. Outside, the white ravens took flight as one, circling the tower in a magnificent spiral against the blue sky. Their calls echoed across the grounds, not ominous anymore, but joyful, like applause, like blessing. When Maeve and Dashiell finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, she noticed something else in the drawer. A small painting, barely bigger than her hand. It showed two figures in the tower, silhouetted against windows full of light. Around them, white ravens in flight. At the bottom, in Elizabeth's handwriting, "Ad Astra, to the stars, for the brave ones who come after." "She painted us," Maeve whispered in wonder, "before we even existed. Or she painted possibility." Dashiell pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. "Maybe that's what the ravens guard. Not curses, just hope." "Hope," Maeve agreed, snuggling into his warmth. "I like that." They stayed in the tower until sunset painted everything gold, reading Elizabeth's journals, discovering a woman who'd loved deeply and lost and found courage to love again. A woman who'd left breadcrumbs for her lonely grandson to find his way home. And in the gardens below, the white ravens settled into the trees, their watch continuing. But now they were watching over something precious, something worth protecting. 3 weeks of bliss. That's what Maeve had enjoyed since that day in the tower. 3 weeks of cataloging books by day and falling deeper in love by night. 3 weeks of stolen kisses in dusty corridors, of debates about Dickens over breakfast, of Dashiell slowly emerging from his shell like a butterfly from a very attractive brooding cocoon. The mansion had transformed. Mrs. Blackwood actually hummed while polishing silver. The young maid, Sophie, no longer looked terrified. Even the gardens seemed less wild, as if responding to the happiness blooming within the stone walls. Maeve was in the library, perched on the rolling ladder and shelving a collection of botanical texts, when Sophie burst through the doors looking absolutely panicked. "Miss Sinclair, there's at the gate a woman. She says—" "Sophie, breathe." Maeve climbed down quickly. "What woman?" "She says she's Mr. Lockhart's fiancée." The botanical text slipped from Maeve's fingers and hit the floor with a thunderous bang. "His what?" "Former fiancé." Dashiell appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled, looking murderous. "Very former, very much not welcome." He turned to Sophie. "Where's Mrs. Blackwood?" "Already at the gate, sir, but the woman is demanding to see you. She has a lawyer with her and something about property claims." "Of course she does." Dashiell's jaw clenched. Caroline Winters never does anything without an angle. Maeve's stomach churned with a nauseating mixture of jealousy and dread. "What does she want?" "Nothing good." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "Maeve, I need you to trust me. Whatever she says, whatever she claims, I trust you." Maeve squeezed his fingers. "But I'm coming with you." "That's probably not—" "I'm coming with you," she repeated firmly. "You don't face dragons alone. Not anymore." Something softened in his expression. "Have I mentioned that I'm ridiculously in love with you?" "Once or twice. Mostly at midnight, when you're supposed to be working." She grinned. "Come on, let's deal with your dragon." Caroline Winters was everything Maeve had feared and nothing like she'd expected. Stunning, yes, tall and willowy with glossy black hair and perfect makeup. But there was something hard in her eyes, something calculating that made Maeve's skin crawl. She stood at the gate in designer clothes, a shark in Chanel, flanked by a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit clutching a briefcase. "Dashiell." Caroline's smile was pure venom wrapped in sugar. You look like a hermit, still hiding from the world." "What do you want, Caroline?" Dashiell's voice was ice. "I want what's owed to me." She gestured to the lawyer. "Show him, Richard." The lawyer fumbled with his briefcase, pulling out official-looking documents. "Mr. Lockhart, my client is invoking a clause in the prenuptial agreement signed 3 years ago. Since the engagement was broken due to your instability, Miss Winters is entitled to compensation for emotional distress, and the engagement was broken because she was sleeping with my business partner," Dashiell said flatly. "There's no clause for infidelity because I was naive enough to trust her." Caroline's mask slipped for a moment, revealing rage. "You can't prove that." Actually, I can. I have photographs. Time-stamped. Witnessed. Dashiell's smile was sharp enough to cut. What I don't have is patience for whatever scheme you're running. This isn't a scheme, Caroline's voice rose. That prenup was signed under duress. It was signed by 2 adults with separate legal counsel. And I deserve compensation for what you put me through. The humiliation of a canceled wedding. That you canceled, Maeve interjected, unable to stay quiet any longer. After cheating on him. I'm sorry. I'm new to this whole evil ex situation. But don't you need to be, the victim to claim damages? Caroline's eyes snapped to her, really seeing her for the first time. And who exactly are you? The help? I'm the librarian, Maeve said sweetly. Also his girlfriend. Also someone who's read enough legal thrillers to know this is extortion dressed up in Louboutins. Dashiell tried very hard not to laugh. Failed. The sound was loud and genuine, and Maeve saw Caroline flinch at it. You've moved on. Caroline's voice turned poisonous. With her? Really, Dashiell? A dowdy little bookworm? Careful, Dashiell said, and his voice dropped to something dangerous. You can insult me all you like. That's familiar territory, but insult Maeve, and we're done being civil. Civil? Caroline laughed shrilly. You think this is about being civil? I spent 2 years planning a life with you? I was going to be Mrs. Dashiell Lockhart, mistress of Ravenswood Mansion, and you threw it all away because of one tiny mistake. You slept with Marcus for 6 months, in my house, in my bed. Dashiell's control was cracking. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Multiple choices. The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should discuss this in a less emotional setting. There's nothing to discuss. Dashiell pulled Maeve close to his side. The prenup was ironclad, and you know it, Richard. This is harassment. If Caroline sets foot on my property again, I'll have her arrested for trespassing. If you contact me again about this ridiculous claim, I'll report you to the Bar Association for ethical violations. You're making a mistake, Caroline hissed. I can destroy you. I have connections. I can make your life. What? Lonely? Isolated? Too late. Already lived that life for 3 years. Dashiell looked down at Maeve with such tenderness it made her heart ache. But I'm done hiding. Done letting you control my narrative. So do your worst, Caroline. I'm not afraid anymore. The white ravens, which had been eerily silent, suddenly erupted in a cacophony of cawing. Hundreds of them swooped down from the roofs, circling above the gate in a massive, intimidating display. Caroline actually screamed, ducking and covering her head. What the hell? They don't like threats, Maeve said, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. Protective creatures, ravens, especially the white ones. The lawyer was already backing toward the car. Miss Winters, perhaps we should— This isn't over! Caroline shrieked, but she was retreating too, practically running to her Mercedes. You'll regret this, Dashiell. They watched the car speed away, tires screeching. The moment it disappeared, Dashiell turned to Maeve and kissed her breathless. That, he said when they finally broke apart, was the sexiest thing I've ever witnessed. Extortion dressed up in Louboutins. Where did that come from? Righteous anger and too many legal dramas. Maeve was shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. Was I too much? I probably shouldn't have. You were perfect. He cupped her face. You stood beside me, defended me, made jokes about legal thrillers while facing down my nightmare ex. Maeve Sinclair, will you marry me? The world stopped. What? She squeaked. Too soon? He looked suddenly uncertain. God, that was too soon. Forget I said yes. Anything, because clearly I've lost my mind, and we've only known each other a few weeks and— Wait, what? Yes. Maeve was laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to everything. Yes to this insane, perfect, ridiculous love story. Yes. He kissed her again, lifting her off her feet, spinning her around while the white ravens circled overhead like a blessing, like a celebration, like they'd known all along how this story would end. Mrs. Blackwood watched from the doorway, smiling for the first time in 3 years. And in the tower, if anyone had been looking, they might have seen the painting Elizabeth had left behind, 2 figures, white ravens, and the words, Ad Astra, to the stars, where the brave ones go. Absolutely not. Dashiell, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You're the one suggesting I voluntarily walk into town where everyone thinks I'm either cursed or criminally insane. Maeve set down her coffee cup with deliberate patience. They were having breakfast in the conservatory, a sun-drenched room that had become their favorite spot, and she'd just proposed the most terrifying idea imaginable, a public engagement announcement. They don't think that anymore, she argued. Mrs. Chen has been telling everyone how wrong they were. Mr. Patterson personally apologized to me last week when I went for groceries. You went to town. Dashiell's head snapped up. Alone? I'm not a prisoner, darling. She reached across the table to take his hand. And it was fine. Better than fine. People were curious. Friendly, even. They want to meet you. They want to gawk at the hermit who finally emerged from his cave. They want to see that you're happy. Maeve squeezed his fingers. That we're happy. And maybe, just maybe, they want a chance to apologize for 3 years of terrible behavior. Dashiell stared at their joined hands, jaw working. Maeve could practically see the war raging inside him, fear versus hope, isolation versus connection. What if they're not ready? He said quietly. What if I'm not ready? Then we'll leave. She brought his hand to her lips. Together. But Dashiell, you can't hide forever. We're getting married. That means cake tastings and invitations and a wedding in town. He closed his eyes. You want a wedding in town. I want our friends and family to celebrate with us. I want Aunt Gertrude to cry happy tears instead of worried ones. I want to show everyone that the cursed mansion is actually full of love and terrible coffee and a man I'm hopelessly devoted to. Despite himself, Dashiell smiled. Mrs. Blackwood's coffee really is tragic. Criminally so. Maeve grinned. So? Will you do this? For me? For us? He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched the decision crystallize in those dark blue eyes. For you, he said finally, I'd walk through fire. Town is significantly less dangerous than fire. Debatable. 3 days later, Maeve found herself standing in front of Patterson's general store with a nervous wreck of a fiancé beside her. I can't do this, Dashiell muttered for the 15th time. You already are doing this. Maeve linked her arm through his. Look, we're standing on Main Street. You're outside. The world hasn't ended. Give it time. Dashiell Lockhart, I love you. But if you don't walk through that door right now, I'm going to kiss you senseless in front of everyone, and then you'll really give them something to talk about. His eyes widened. You wouldn't... She grabbed his collar and pulled him down into a kiss that was absolutely inappropriate for public consumption. When she released him, Dashiell looked dazed, and a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, clapping and whistling. Well, he said breathlessly, subtlety was never your strong suit. Neither was yours. She tugged him toward the store. Come on, hermit boy. Time to buy some normalcy. Mr. Patterson nearly dropped his clipboard when they entered. Mr. Lockhart. He rushed around the counter, hand extended. Sir, I want to apologize. For everything. The harassment, the rumors, the signs. We were wrong, completely wrong. Dashiell shook his hand hesitantly. I appreciate that. Your fiancée here has been setting us all straight. Patterson beamed at Maeve. She's got fire, this one. Told Mrs. Chen exactly where she could shove her pamphlets. I was diplomatic about it, Maeve protested. You told her to shove her concern in a place where the sun don't shine. Diplomatically. Dashiell was trying very hard not to laugh. Over the next hour, something miraculous happened. People came into the store specifically to meet Dashiell, to shake his hand, to apologize, to welcome him back to the living world. Mrs. Chen arrived with homemade dumplings and tears. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Lockhart. I was a meddling old fool." "You were worried," Dashiell said, surprising even himself with his graciousness. "I understand that now." Young mothers came with children who'd heard stories about the scary mansion and were delighted to learn it was just a big house with friendly birds. Teenagers asked about the library. Could they maybe visit sometime? Business owners offered services for the wedding. The baker insisted on making their cake for free as an apology. And through it all, Maeve watched her fiancé slowly, gradually, beautifully unfold. His shoulders relaxed. His smile came easier. He laughed at Mr. Patterson's terrible jokes. He even agreed to consider opening the library for monthly community events. By the time they left the store, arms full of groceries and wedding pamphlets, Dashiell looked lighter somehow, years younger. "That wasn't so bad," he admitted, as they walked back toward the mansion. "It was wonderful." Maeve bumped his shoulder. "You were wonderful. See? The world doesn't hate you. The world is significantly more tolerable when you're in it." They were almost at the gates when a sleek black car pulled up beside them. Maeve's stomach dropped, expecting Caroline, but instead a distinguished older gentleman emerged. "Dashiell Lockhart," he called. "Forgive the intrusion. My name is Victor Ashford. I'm with the Historical Society." Dashiell tensed. "How can I help you?" "I've been researching your family's history for a book on regional architecture." Ashford pulled out a card. "Ravenswood Mansion is historically significant. The art collection alone is invaluable. I'd love to discuss a possible preservation grant and perhaps a small exhibition." "Exhibition?" Dashiell looked stunned. "Your grandmother's work deserves to be seen. The paintings, the journals, they're remarkable." Ashford smiled warmly. "The Historical Society would be honored to help preserve and share the Ravenswood legacy. Think about it." After he drove away, Dashiell stood frozen in place. "Are you okay?" Maeve asked softly. "People want to celebrate my family." His voice cracked. "Not mock us, not fear us. Celebrate. Because they never really knew you." Maeve wrapped her arms around him. "They just knew stories. Now they know the truth." He buried his face in her hair. "I spent 3 years thinking I was protecting myself by hiding, but I was just lonely. So desperately lonely. Not anymore." She pulled back to look at him. Never again. Above them, the white ravens circled, dozens of them creating patterns in the sky like a living kaleidoscope. "They're beautiful," came a voice. Aunt Gertrude stood at the gate, looking sheepish. "I never noticed before how beautiful they really are." "Aunt Gertrude?" Maeve approached cautiously. "I came to apologize. To both of you." Gertrude twisted her hands. "I was so afraid of losing you, Maeve, that I made everyone else afraid too. I'm sorry, Mr. Lockhart. You didn't deserve what this town put you through." Dashiell studied her for a moment, then smiled. Genuine and kind. "You were protecting someone you love. I understand that. Forgiven." Gertrude's eyes filled with tears. "You're a good man. I see that now." She wiped her face. "So when's this wedding? Because I'm going to need time to find an appropriately dramatic hat." Maeve laughed, pulling her aunt into a hug. "Soon. Very soon." That night, back in the library with a fire crackling and their favorite books scattered around them, Dashiell pulled Maeve into his lap. "Thank you," he murmured against her temple. "For what?" "For making me brave. For breaking down my walls. For showing me that life is worth living when you have someone to share it with." Maeve turned to face him fully. "You did that yourself. I just opened the door. You're the one who walked through it." "We walked through it together," he corrected, kissing her softly. "Just like we'll do everything else. Together." "Together," she agreed. Outside, the white ravens settled into the trees for the night. Tomorrow would bring wedding plans and historical society meetings and a community slowly learning to embrace the mansion on the hill. But tonight was theirs. Perfect. Complete. Home. The morning of the wedding, Maeve woke to find her windowsill covered in white feathers, not scattered randomly, arranged deliberately in the shape of a heart. "You sentimental birds," she whispered, touching the soft plumes. Outside, dozens of white ravens perched on every available surface, watching with their knowing eyes. "I hope you're ready for a party." They cawed in unison, and Maeve could have sworn it sounded like approval. The past month had been a whirlwind. The mansion had been transformed, not drastically, but lovingly. Gardens tamed just enough to be romantic instead of wild. Windows cleaned until they sparkled. The ballroom on the third floor, unused for decades, reopened and decorated with thousands of fairy lights and autumn flowers. And the library, the library had become something magical. The entire town had volunteered to help complete the cataloging. What started as Maeve's solitary project became a community effort, with locals discovering the incredible collection and falling in love with Ravenswood Mansion all over again. "Maeve Sinclair! You get away from that window!" Aunt Gertrude burst into the room wearing the most spectacular fascinator Maeve had ever seen, a creation involving peacock feathers, crystals, and what appeared to be a small bird's nest. "Is that hat structurally sound?" Maeve asked, trying not to laugh. "It's a statement piece." Gertrude sniffed. "Now come. Your dress is waiting, and we have exactly 2 hours before you become Mrs. Dashiell Lockhart." The dress was vintage lace, simple, elegant, with long sleeves and a flowing skirt that made Maeve feel like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. Mrs. Blackwood had found it in the attic, perfectly preserved in tissue paper. "It was Elizabeth's," the housekeeper said softly as she helped with the buttons. "She'd want you to wear it." Maeve's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect. You're perfect." Sophie appeared with a bouquet of white roses and autumn leaves. "Mr. Lockhart is pacing holes in the ballroom floor. I've never seen him so nervous." "Good," Maeve grinned. "Serves him right for proposing on impulse." "Best impulse of his life," Gertrude said, dabbing at her eyes. "Oh, I promised myself I wouldn't cry yet." The ceremony was set for sunset in the mansion's rose garden, now gloriously restored. As Maeve walked down the makeshift aisle, just a path through the roses, she saw everything she'd never known she wanted. The entire town had come. Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, beaming. Victor Ashford from the Historical Society had his camera ready. Young Sophie stood as her bridesmaid, crying openly. Mrs. Blackwood clutched a handkerchief, her usual stern expression crumbling into joy. And Dashiell. He stood at the altar wearing a perfectly tailored suit, hair slightly tousled by the wind, and when he saw her, his entire face transformed. Joy. Wonder. Love so profound it took her breath away. The white ravens lined every surface, the arbor, the fence, the roses themselves, like ethereal guardians. As Maeve reached Dashiell, they all took flight simultaneously, circling overhead in a magnificent spiral. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back, taking her hands. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You're not so bad yourself." The ceremony was simple and perfect. They'd written their own vows. Dashiell went first, voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. "Maeve, 3 months ago, I was a ghost haunting my own life. Then you walked through my gates with 1 suitcase and more courage than I'd ever seen, and you reminded me what it means to be alive. You saw past the rumors, past my walls, past every defense I'd built, and you chose me anyway. You made me believe in hope again, in love, in tomorrow. I promise to spend every day earning the gift of your faith in me. I promise to be brave with you, for you, always." Maeve was already crying. "Well, how am I supposed to follow that?" The crowd laughed softly. She took a shaky breath. "Dashiell, I came here looking for a job. I found a home. I found purpose. I found myself. But most importantly, I found you. Brilliant, wounded, wonderful you. You taught me that the bravest thing we can do is let someone see us completely and trust they'll stay. So here's my promise. I'll stay. Through every fear, every doubt, every midnight library session where you insist Byron is superior to Shelley. He is, Dashiell interjected, grinning. I'll stay. I choose you. Today. Tomorrow. Forever. Forever, he echoed. When they kissed, the white ravens erupted in a cacophony of joyful cries, and the entire assembly burst into applause. The reception in the ballroom was pure magic. Fairy lights twinkled like stars. The Historical Society had arranged a display of Elizabeth's paintings, including the prophetic one of 2 figures in the tower. Music played. People danced. Mr. Patterson gave a surprisingly heartfelt toast about second chances and community. Mrs. Chen's dumplings were a massive hit. Dashiell pulled Maeve onto the dance floor as the sun set through the tall windows, painting everything gold. Happy, he murmured against her temple as they swayed. Deliriously, she looked up at him. You? I didn't know I could feel this much happiness without exploding. He kissed her forehead. Thank you for saving me. We saved each other, she corrected. That's how this works. Later, as the party continued below, they slipped away to the East Tower, their tower now, the place where everything had changed. I have something for you, Dashiell said, pulling out a small wrapped box. Inside was a compass, antique and beautiful, with an inscription, Ad Astra, so we never lose our way home. Dashiell, she breathed. Home isn't the mansion, he said softly. It's you. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. Maeve kissed him with everything she had, all her love, all her joy, all her gratitude for this impossible, perfect life they'd built together. Outside, the white ravens settled into the trees, their watch continuing but peaceful now. Content. The cursed mansion had never been cursed at all. It had simply been waiting for 2 lonely souls to find each other, waiting for courage to triumph over fear, waiting for love to transform stone and sorrow into light and laughter, waiting for Maeve and Dashiell to prove that the bravest thing we can do is choose hope, choose love, choose each other, and live happily ever after. As the stars emerged above Ravenswood Mansion, 2 figures stood silhouetted in the tower window, surrounded by light and love and the promise of forever. Ad Astra, to the stars, where the brave ones go, where they'd always belonged. 2 years later, the library was full of children. Maeve stood at the entrance, coffee in hand. Proper coffee now. They'd finally convinced Mrs. Blackwood to upgrade her brewing method, watching the weekly Saturday story hour with profound contentment. 23 kids sat cross-legged on cushions while Dashiell, perched on a stool with a leather-bound volume, brought the tale of Treasure Island to life with dramatic voices and sweeping gestures. He was magnificent with children, patient, funny, never condescending. They adored him. And Long John Silver said, Dashiell lowered his voice to a gravelly rumble, "Them that die'll be the lucky ones." The children shrieked with delighted terror. "Mr. Lockhart, you're scaring them," Maeve called out, not bothering to hide her smile. "Mrs. Lockhart, they love it," he shot back, eyes twinkling. "Don't you, crew?" "Yes," the children chorused. Mrs. Lockhart, 2 years married, and the title still sent a thrill through her. The mansion had been transformed beyond recognition. The Ravenswood Community Library and Arts Center, as it was now officially known, hosted weekly events, story hours, art classes, book clubs, historical tours. Elizabeth's paintings graced the walls of what had become a small gallery. The gardens were immaculate, maintained by volunteers who'd fallen in love with the property. The town had embraced them completely. Dashiell served on the Historical Society board. Maeve ran literacy programs. They hosted an annual autumn festival that had become the social event of the season. The cursed mansion was now the heart of the community. "Mama, the baby's kicking again." Sophie, no longer the terrified young maid but their full-time events coordinator and honorary little sister, appeared at Maeve's elbow, looking at her rounded belly with concern. "She's just excited," Maeve said, rubbing the spot where their daughter was performing gymnastics. "She likes her daddy's pirate voice." At 7 months pregnant, Maeve was radiant. Dashiell had cried when they'd found out, actual tears of joy, and had proceeded to read parenting books with the same intensity he'd once reserved for Byron. Mrs. Chen brought more dumplings, Sophie reported, and Mr. Patterson donated another 100 books, and someone from the university called about Elizabeth's journals. They want to publish them? "Tell them yes," Maeve said. "Elizabeth would love that." The story hour ended to enthusiastic applause. Children mobbed Dashiell for hugs before their parents collected them. Each family left with a book from the Take One, Share One shelf Maeve had installed. When the last child departed, Dashiell immediately crossed to Maeve and placed both hands on her belly. "How are my girls?" he murmured. "Your daughter is training for the Olympics. Your wife needs to sit down." He guided her to the leather armchair, his grandmother's favorite, and settled beside her. "I was thinking, dangerous." He laughed. "We should paint the nursery this week, and I want to show her the tower when she's old enough. Tell her about her great-great-grandmother Elizabeth. She'll love that." Maeve leaned into him. "Can you believe this is our life? Sometimes I wake up and think I'm still in that cockroach apartment, and this has all been a beautiful dream. If it's a dream, we're sharing it." He kissed her temple. "Best dream I've ever had." The sound of determined footsteps announced Mrs. Blackwood's arrival. "Sir, madam, there's something you should see in the tower." They exchanged glances and followed her up the spiral stairs, slowly, because Maeve's center of gravity was currently bizarre. When they reached Elizabeth's studio, they found something impossible: a new painting. On a fresh canvas that hadn't been there yesterday, someone had painted the mansion gardens in full bloom. In the foreground, a man and woman sat on a blanket, the woman clearly pregnant, reading to a small girl with auburn curls and dark blue eyes. White ravens perched in every tree, watching over them. At the bottom, in Elizabeth's unmistakable handwriting, "For Maeve, Dashiell, and little Elizabeth, keep choosing brave. Love, Gran." Maeve's hand flew to her mouth. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Mrs. Blackwood's voice was soft. "This mansion has always been magical. Love calls to love. Your happiness echoes through these walls." Dashiell pulled Maeve close, both of them staring at the painting, at their future daughter, whom they'd already decided to name Elizabeth. Neither had told anyone yet. "She knows," Maeve whispered. "Somehow, she knows." "She's been watching over us all along," Dashiell said, voice thick with emotion. "Making sure we found each other, making sure her legacy continues." Outside, the white ravens took flight in their familiar spiral pattern. But now there were even more. The original flock had tripled in size. They called out in a symphony of joy. That evening, after the volunteers had left and the mansion settled into comfortable quiet, Maeve and Dashiell returned to the garden where they'd married. Fairy lights twinkled overhead. The fountain, restored and flowing, played its gentle music. 2 years ago I was terrified, Dashiell said, holding her close. Terrified of wanting you. Terrified of losing you. Terrified of hope. And now? Now I'm terrified I'll mess up this whole parenting thing. He smiled ruefully. But mostly I'm just grateful. For you. For this life. For second chances. Third chances, Maeve corrected. Fourth. 100th. We get as many as we need. He knelt carefully, not proposing again, just wanting to be closer to their daughter. He pressed his lips to Maeve's belly and whispered, "Little Elizabeth, your mama is the bravest person in the world. She's going to teach you to be brave too. To choose love over fear. To believe in magic and white ravens and impossible happy endings. Are you crying, Dashiell Lockhart? Maeve asked, running her fingers through his hair. Maybe. He looked up at her, unashamed. Happy tears. The only kind worth crying. Later, in their bedroom, the emerald-draped sanctuary where this story had truly begun, they lay together in the darkness, hands intertwined. Thank you, Dashiell murmured. For what? For accepting that job. For being stubborn. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For making this haunted mansion a home. It was always a home, Maeve said softly. It was just waiting for the right people to fill it with love. Through the window, they could see the white ravens settling for the night. Guardians, messengers, witnesses to the most beautiful transformation of all, two broken souls becoming whole together. Somewhere in the mansion, in Elizabeth's tower, that impossible painting glowed softly in the moonlight. A promise, a blessing, a reminder that love transcends time, that hope never dies, and that the bravest choice we can make is to open our hearts. Ad Astra, to the stars, where Maeve and Dashiell had found each other, where they would raise their daughter, where their love story, and all the stories still to come, would live forever, in a mansion once feared, now beloved, where white ravens watched, where magic was real, where happily ever after wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning, the end.